Question 1. Market research demonstrates that a plaintiff in an Alabama civil lawsuit has filed a complaint alleging breach of contract. The defendant has responded and subsequently filed a motion for summary judgment, asserting that there is no genuine issue of material fact and that they are entitled to judgment as a matter of law. The plaintiff's attorney believes that crucial evidence supporting the existence of a contract is still being sought through discovery, which is ongoing, and that this evidence will demonstrate a genuine issue of material fact. What is the most appropriate course of action for the plaintiff's attorney to take under Alabama civil procedure law? Option A. File an affidavit from the plaintiff that makes broad claims about the contract's existence without providing any specific factual details or evidence. Option B. Do not file a response to the motion for summary judgment, assuming the court will recognize the need for further discovery. Option C. File a response that relies on general assertions that a contract existed, without providing specific factual support or explaining the absence of further evidence. Option D. File a timely response to the motion for summary judgment, attaching any existing supporting evidence, and if necessary, filing a Rule 56F affidavit explaining why essential evidence cannot yet be presented and detailing the specific discovery needed to obtain it. The correct answer is D. File a timely response to the motion for summary judgment, attaching any existing supporting evidence, and if necessary, filing a Rule 56F affidavit explaining why essential evidence cannot yet be presented and detailing the specific discovery needed to obtain it. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama civil litigation, effectively responding to a motion for summary judgment when the evidence is not yet fully developed. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to present a genuine issue of material fact to defeat summary judgment against the risk of revealing too much of one's case prematurely or making unsupported assertions. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Alabama rules of civil procedure while protecting the client's interests. The best professional approach involves filing a timely response that clearly articulates, with supporting evidence or a good faith basis for believing such evidence will be available, why a genuine issue of material fact exists. This includes identifying specific facts that are in dispute and explaining how those disputed facts are material to the outcome of the case. If discovery is ongoing and crucial evidence is not yet obtained, the attorney must file an affidavit under Rule 56F of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, explaining why the necessary evidence cannot be presented at this time and what specific discovery is needed to obtain it. This demonstrates diligence and adherence to procedural rules. Failing to file a response altogether is a critical regulatory failure. Under Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, a motion for summary judgment may be granted if it is not responded to within the prescribed time, effectively conceding the movant's facts and legal arguments. This violates the attorney's duty to zealously represent the client and protect their legal rights. Another incorrect approach is to file a response that relies on vague assertions or speculation without pointing to specific evidence or explaining why evidence is unavailable. This fails to meet the burden of demonstrating a genuine issue of material fact as required by Rule 56C of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure. Such a response risks the court granting summary judgment because the non-moving party has not presented sufficient evidence to create a dispute. Finally, attempting to defeat summary judgment by filing an affidavit that contains only conclusory statements or hearsay without any factual support is also professionally unacceptable. Rule 56E of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure requires that affidavits be made on personal knowledge, set forth such facts as would be admissible in evidence, and show affirmatively that the affiant is competent to testify to the matters stated therein. Relying on such deficient affidavits fails to create a genuine issue of material fact and undermines the integrity of the judicial process. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a thorough review of the summary judgment motion and supporting evidence, an assessment of the current state of discovery, and a strategic decision on how best to demonstrate a genuine issue of material fact, or if necessary, how to properly request additional time for discovery under Rule 56F. This requires a deep understanding of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure and the evidentiary standards for summary judgment. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that a significant number of personal injury claims in Alabama arise from automobile accidents. A resident of Mobile County, Alabama, was injured in a car accident that occurred in Baldwin County, Alabama. The driver of the other vehicle involved in the accident resides in Jefferson County, Alabama, and regularly conducts business in Jefferson County. The plaintiff's attorney's office is located in Shelby County, Alabama. If the plaintiff wishes to file a lawsuit seeking damages for the injury sustained, which of the following approaches represents the most appropriate and legally sound method for determining the initial venue in Alabama? Option A. File the lawsuit in a county where a key witness other than the plaintiff or defendant resides. Option B. File the lawsuit in the county where the plaintiff resides. Option C. File the lawsuit in a county where the defendant resides or where the cause of action arose. Option D. File the lawsuit in the county where the plaintiff's attorney's primary office is located. Correct answer is C. File the lawsuit in a county where the defendant resides or where the cause of action arose. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in civil litigation, determining the proper geographical location for a lawsuit within Alabama. The professional challenge lies in accurately applying Alabama's venue rules to a fact pattern involving multiple potential locations, ensuring the lawsuit is filed in a court that has the authority to hear the case and is convenient for the parties and witnesses, while also avoiding procedural delays and potential dismissal. Careful judgment is required to balance the plaintiff's right to choose a forum with the defendant's right to a fair and convenient trial. The best professional approach involves carefully analyzing the facts against Alabama's venue statutes, specifically focusing on where the cause of action arose and where the defendant resides or does business. This approach prioritizes adherence to the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure concerning venue. By filing in a county where the defendant resides or where the cause of action arose, the plaintiff ensures compliance with the primary venue provisions. This is the most legally sound and procedurally efficient method, minimizing the risk of a venue challenge and subsequent transfer or dismissal. Filing the lawsuit in a county solely because it is the plaintiff's home county, without regard to where the cause of action arose or where the defendant resides or conducts business, is an incorrect approach. Alabama venue rules are not primarily designed for the plaintiff's convenience, but rather to ensure the lawsuit is brought in a location with a logical connection to the dispute and the parties. This approach risks a successful motion to dismiss for improper venue. Choosing a county where a minor, non-essential witness happens to reside, without a strong connection to the cause of action or the defendant's presence, is also an incorrect approach. While witness convenience can be a factor in transfer of venue motions, it is not a primary determinant of initial venue. This choice disregards the core principles of venue established by Alabama law and could lead to the case being dismissed or transferred. Initiating the lawsuit in a county where the plaintiff's attorney has an office, irrespective of the factual connections to the dispute, is fundamentally flawed. Attorney convenience is not a permissible basis for establishing venue under Alabama law. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of the purpose of venue rules and would likely result in a motion to dismiss for improper venue, potentially incurring sanctions for frivolous filing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the plaintiff's claims and the factual basis for those claims. Next, a meticulous review of the relevant Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure governing venue is essential. This involves identifying potential counties where the defendant resides, where the cause of action arose, or where property involved in the action is located. The professional should then weigh these options, prioritizing the most legally defensible and procedurally advantageous forum, and be prepared to articulate the basis for venue in the chosen county. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates that a lawsuit has been filed in Alabama State Court against a defendant residing in Georgia who has no physical presence or prior business dealings within Alabama. The plaintiff alleges breach of contract, claiming the defendant failed to deliver goods as agreed upon in an online transaction initiated by the defendant. The defendant's attorney is considering the initial steps to defend their client. What is the most appropriate and legally sound initial course of action for the defendant's attorney in Alabama? Option A. Immediately engage in discovery to gather evidence supporting the defendant's position on the breach of contract claim. Option B. File an answer to the complaint, denying the allegations and asserting affirmative defenses, while reserving the right to raise jurisdictional issues later. Option C. File a motion to dismiss the complaint for lack of personal jurisdiction, supported by affidavits demonstrating the defendant's lack of minimum contacts with Alabama. Option D. Contact the plaintiff's attorney to negotiate a settlement before filing any responsive pleadings. The correct answer is C. File a motion to dismiss the complaint for lack of personal jurisdiction, supported by affidavits demonstrating the defendant's lack of minimum contacts with Alabama. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential jurisdictional defect that, if not addressed properly, could lead to significant procedural complications, including dismissal of the case and potential prejudice to the client's interests. The lawyer must navigate the intricacies of Alabama's long-arm statute and constitutional due process requirements to determine if the court has personal jurisdiction over the out-of-state defendant. Failure to correctly assess and address this issue can result in wasted resources, reputational damage, and ethical breaches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to file a motion to dismiss for lack of personal jurisdiction, supported by affidavits and legal arguments demonstrating that the defendant lacks sufficient minimum contacts with Alabama. This approach directly confronts the potential jurisdictional defect under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 12b-2, Alabama's long-arm statute, R. Civ. P. 4.2, extends jurisdiction to the limits of the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Therefore, the analysis must focus on whether the defendant purposefully availed itself of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, such that it could reasonably anticipate being hailed into an Alabama court. This proactive and legally sound approach ensures that the jurisdictional issue is properly raised and litigated before proceeding further, protecting the client from potential future challenges to the judgment. Incorrect approach is analysis. Filing an answer without raising the jurisdictional challenge first is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 12H.1, a defense of lack of personal jurisdiction is waived if not made by motion or in the responsive pleading if no motion is made. This means the defendant would likely forfeit their right to challenge jurisdiction, potentially leading to an adverse ruling and a judgment against them that could have been avoided. Proceeding to discovery without resolving the jurisdictional question is also professionally unacceptable. It expends client resources on a case that may be dismissed for lack of jurisdiction, violating the duty to represent the client diligently and efficiently. Furthermore, it risks conducting discovery in a forum that lacks the authority to render a binding judgment. Agreeing to a settlement without first addressing the jurisdictional defect is also professionally unsound. It could result in a settlement agreement that is unenforceable or subject to challenge due to the court's lack of jurisdiction. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should first meticulously review the facts to assess potential jurisdictional grounds under Alabama law, specifically R. Civ. P. 4.2 and relevant case law interpreting constitutional due process. They must then determine the most appropriate procedural mechanism to raise the challenge, which in this case is a motion to dismiss under R. Civ. P. 12b-2. This requires careful consideration of waiver rules R. Civ. P. 12h-1 and the strategic implications of each procedural step. Diligence and client communication are paramount. The client should be informed of the potential jurisdictional issue and the proposed course of action. Question 4. Which approach would be most appropriate for an Alabama state court to consider when faced with a motion to dismiss a civil action based on the doctrine of forum non-convenience, where the defendant argues that the litigation would be significantly more convenient and appropriate in a different state? Option A. Dismissal of the case immediately upon the defendant's assertion of inconvenience, provided they claim the alternative forum is more convenient. Option B. A comprehensive evaluation of both private and public interest factors, as well as the availability of an adequate alternative forum, to determine if the balance strongly favors dismissal. Option C. Granting the motion to dismiss based on the defendant's subjective belief that the alternative forum is better for them, without a detailed factual or legal analysis. Option D. Retention of jurisdiction solely because the plaintiff chose to file the lawsuit in Alabama, without further inquiry into the convenience factors. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive evaluation of both private and public interest factors, as well as the availability of an adequate alternative forum, to determine if the balance strongly favors dismissal. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a careful balancing of competing interests. the plaintiff's right to access justice in a chosen forum versus the defendant's right to a fair and efficient trial. Considering the practicalities of litigation, the court must weigh the convenience of the parties and witnesses, the availability of an adequate alternative forum, and the public interest factors. A deep understanding of Alabama's procedural rules and case law on forum non-convenience is crucial to avoid erroneous dismissal or retention of a case that is improperly situated. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of the factors outlined in Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 1:13 and relevant case law. This includes a detailed examination of the private interest factors, relative ease of access to sources of proof, availability of compulsory process for attendance of unwilling witnesses, cost of obtaining attendance of willing witnesses, possibility of view of premises, and all other practical problems that make trial of a case easy, expeditious, and inexpensive, and the public interest factors, administrative difficulties for courts, local interest in having localized controversies decided at home, and the appropriateness of the forum to the applicable law. The court should only grant a motion to dismiss on forum non-convenience grounds if the balance of these factors strongly favors the defendant and an adequate alternative forum exists. This methodical, factor-by-factor assessment ensures that the decision is grounded in established legal principles and promotes fairness and judicial economy. An approach that dismisses the case solely based on the defendant's assertion of inconvenience, without a comprehensive evaluation of all relevant private and public interest factors, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct a thorough analysis risks depriving the plaintiff of a forum where they may have legitimate grounds to sue, ignoring the principle that a plaintiff's choice of forum is generally given deference. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to deny the motion to dismiss simply because the plaintiff filed suit in Alabama, without adequately considering whether Alabama is truly the most convenient and appropriate forum. This overlooks the court's responsibility to manage its docket efficiently and to ensure that litigation occurs in a location that best serves the interests of justice and the parties involved, especially when compelling evidence suggests a significantly more convenient alternative forum exists. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the perceived popularity of a forum rather than a structured, evidence-based application of the forum non-convenience factors would be flawed. This would lead to arbitrary decisions that do not align with the established legal framework for determining forum non-convenience, undermining the predictability and fairness of the legal process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the core legal issue, forum non-convenience. 2. Recalling and applying the specific procedural rules and relevant case law of the jurisdiction, Alabama. 3. Systematically evaluating all enumerated private and public interest factors with supporting evidence. 4. Considering the plaintiff's choice of forum and the availability of an adequate alternative forum. And 5. Articulating a clear, reasoned decision that demonstrates adherence to legal standards and promotes justice and judicial efficiency. Question 5. Investigation of a civil matter in Alabama reveals that the defendant was properly served with a complaint and summons, but has failed to file any responsive pleading within the time prescribed by the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure. What is the most appropriate and procedurally sound course of action for the plaintiff's attorney to pursue? Option A. Immediately file a motion to set the case for trial. Option B. File a motion for default judgment with the court. Option C. Contact the defendant directly to demand an answer to the complaint. Option D. File a motion to compel discovery from the defendant. The correct answer is B. File a motion for default judgment with the court. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama civil litigation where a defendant, after being served, fails to respond within the statutory timeframe. The plaintiff's attorney must navigate the procedural rules to obtain a favorable outcome without engaging in improper tactics that could jeopardize the case or incur sanctions. The core challenge lies in understanding the precise procedural mechanism available to advance the case when a defendant is in default. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves filing a motion for default judgment. This is the legally prescribed method under Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure to seek a judgment against a party who has failed to plead or otherwise defend as required by the rules. Rule 55 of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure specifically outlines the process for obtaining a default judgment, requiring the plaintiff to demonstrate that the defendant has been defaulted. This approach is procedurally sound, ethically compliant, and directly addresses the defendant's failure to respond. Incorrect approach is analysis. Pursuing an immediate trial without first seeking a default judgment is procedurally incorrect. Alabama law requires a formal process to establish default before a trial can be considered, and proceeding to trial would bypass essential procedural steps, potentially leading to dismissal of the motion or a mistrial if the defendant were to appear an object. Contacting the defendant directly to demand an answer, without involving the court, is also professionally problematic. While communication can be beneficial, in a situation where a defendant has already failed to respond to formal service, direct contact without a court order or prior agreement could be misconstrued, especially if the defendant is represented by counsel. Furthermore, it bypasses the established procedural mechanism for addressing default. Filing a motion to compel discovery is inappropriate in this context. Discovery motions are used to obtain information or responses to discovery requests. Here, the issue is not a lack of discovery, but a complete failure to respond to the initial complaint, which is a more fundamental procedural default. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama civil procedure must adhere strictly to the Alabama rules of civil procedure. When a defendant fails to respond to a complaint, the first step is to determine if the defendant is in default. If default has occurred, the appropriate procedural remedy is to file a motion for default judgment, supported by evidence of service and the defendant's failure to plead. This ensures that the court process is followed, fairness is maintained, and the rights of all parties are respected within the established legal framework. Question 6. In a civil lawsuit pending in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County, Alabama, where Ms. Anya Sharma is suing Mr. Ben Carter for damages arising from a contract dispute, Mr. Carter believes that a separate entity, Global Solutions, Inc., is entirely responsible for the breach of contract that led to Ms. Sharma's alleged damages. Mr. Carter has not yet filed any responsive pleading to Ms. Sharma's complaint. What is the most appropriate procedural step for Mr. Carter to take to bring Global Solutions, Inc. into the existing lawsuit and assert his claim of their sole responsibility? Option A. File a third-party complaint against Global Solutions, Inc. under Rule 14 of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, seeking to implead them as a party liable for all or part of Ms. Sharma's claim. Option B. Advise Ms. Sharma to amend her complaint to include Global Solutions, Inc. as a defendant. Option C. Immediately file a new, separate lawsuit in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County against Global Solutions, Inc. for indemnification. Option D. Wait until a final judgment is entered in the case between Ms. Sharma and Mr. Carter, and then file a claim against Global Solutions, Inc. for contribution. Correct answer is A. File a third-party complaint against Global Solutions, Inc. under Rule 14 of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, seeking to implead them as a party liable for all or part of Ms. Sharma's claim. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in litigation where a defendant facing a claim believes another party, not yet involved in the lawsuit, is responsible for the damages. The professional challenge lies in navigating the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure regarding the timely and proper assertion of claims against new parties, balancing the need for efficient resolution with the rights of all potential parties. Failure to act strategically can result in waiving the right to seek contribution or indemnity from the responsible party, or unnecessarily complicating the existing litigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves filing a cross-claim against the third party within the existing lawsuit, provided the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure permit such an action. This approach is correct because Rule 13G of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure allows a party to assert a cross-claim against a co-party arising out of the transaction or occurrence that is the subject matter of the original action or of a counterclaim therein. Furthermore, Rule 14 of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure concerning impleader allows a defending party to serve a summons and complain on a person not a party to the action who is or may be liable to the defending party for all or part of the plaintiff's claim against the defending party. This allows for the efficient adjudication of related claims within a single proceeding, preventing multiplicity of suits and promoting judicial economy. Incorrect approach is analysis. Filing a separate lawsuit against the third party without seeking to join them in the current action is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to leverage the procedural mechanisms available in Alabama for bringing all related claims before the court simultaneously. It risks inconsistent judgments, increased litigation costs, and potential waiver of the right to contribution or indemnity if the statute of limitations for a new action has expired, or if the court in the original action deems the claim waived due to procedural delay. Waiting to raise the issue of the third party's liability only after a judgment has been entered against the defendant in the original lawsuit is also professionally unacceptable. This approach significantly undermines the defendant's ability to seek relief. Alabama law, like most jurisdictions, has specific rules and time limits for asserting claims, including cross-claims and impleader actions. Waiting until after judgment is typically too late to properly implead a third party or assert a cross-claim under Rule 13 or Rule 14, as the opportunity to have that party participate in the defense and discovery of the original action will have been lost. Ignoring the third party's potential liability and proceeding with defending the original lawsuit without attempting to involve them is professionally unacceptable. This approach neglects a crucial strategic opportunity to shift responsibility or share the burden of any potential judgment. It demonstrates a failure to adequately investigate and pursue all available legal avenues to protect the client's interests, potentially leading to a greater financial burden on the defendant than necessary. Professional reasoning. Professionals should first thoroughly review the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, specifically Rules 13, Counterclaim and Cross-Claim, and 14, Third-Party Practice. They must then assess whether the third party's liability arises from the same transaction or occurrence as the original claim, or if the third party may be liable to the defendant for all or part of the plaintiff's claim. If these conditions are met, the professional should promptly file the appropriate pleading, a cross-claim or a third-party complaint, within the time limits prescribed by the rules or court order. This ensures all relevant parties are before the court, promoting efficiency and protecting the client's rights. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that a defendant in an ongoing civil lawsuit in Alabama has recently discovered evidence suggesting that separate entity, not currently a party to the litigation, may be solely or partially liable for the plaintiff's alleged damages. The defendant's attorney is considering how best to bring this potentially liable entity into the existing lawsuit. What is the most appropriate procedural step for the defendant's attorney to take under Alabama civil procedure law? Option A. Initiate a completely separate lawsuit against the entity for contribution or indemnity. Option B. File a motion for leave to file a third-party complaint against the entity. Option C. Amend the defendant's answer to include allegations of liability against the entity. Option D. Delay any action until after a final judgment is entered in the current case, and then pursue the entity. The correct answer is B. File a motion for leave to file a third-party complaint against the entity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the timing of the discovery of a potential third-party claim and the need to balance efficient litigation with the rights of all parties involved. The plaintiff's attorney must carefully consider the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure regarding impleader to avoid waiving potential claims or prejudicing their client's case, while also ensuring that the third party is brought into the action in a timely and procedurally sound manner. The risk of delay and the potential for the third party to raise defenses that could impact the original plaintiff's case necessitate a strategic and compliant approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves filing a motion for leave to file a third-party complaint. Under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 14, a defendant may move to serve a summons and complaint on a person not a party to the action who is or may be liable to the defendant for all or part of the plaintiff's claim against the defendant. This rule allows for the timely introduction of a third party when the defendant believes that party bears responsibility for the plaintiff's damages. Filing a motion for leave is crucial because it allows the court to review the proposed third-party complaint and ensure it is filed within a reasonable time and does not unduly complicate or delay the original action. This approach respects the procedural requirements of Alabama law and ensures fairness to all parties. Incorrect approach is analysis. Pursuing a separate lawsuit against the potential third party without seeking to implead them in the current action is procedurally flawed. While a separate action might eventually be filed, it fails to address the defendant's potential right to contribution or indemnity within the existing litigation, potentially leading to inconsistent judgments and increased litigation costs. Furthermore, it bypasses the mechanism provided by Rule 14 for resolving claims involving multiple parties efficiently. Attempting to amend the original answer to include allegations against the third party without filing a formal third-party complaint is improper. The Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure distinguish between amending pleadings to assert claims against existing parties and impleading new parties. Such an amendment would not bring the third party under the court's jurisdiction and would not provide them with proper notice or an opportunity to defend themselves as required by due process. Waiting until after a judgment is rendered in the original action to pursue the third party is also professionally unsound. This approach forfeits the opportunity to have the third party's liability determined concurrently with the defendant's liability to the plaintiff. It also risks the third party raising defenses that could have been asserted earlier, and it may complicate the collection of any potential judgment against the third party. This delay is contrary to the efficient administration of justice envisioned by the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should first identify the relevant procedural rules governing the joinder of parties, specifically Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 14. They should then assess whether the conditions for impleader are met, considering the potential liability of the third party to the defendant. The most prudent course of action is to seek court permission to file a third-party complaint, demonstrating good cause and adherence to procedural timelines. This ensures that all claims are resolved efficiently and fairly within a single action, while respecting the rights of all parties involved. Question 8. The evaluation methodology shows that a new client in Birmingham, Alabama, has approached your firm alleging that a local contractor performed substandard work on their home renovation project, causing significant water damage. The client provides you with a folder of invoices, photographs of the damage, and a few emails exchanged with the contractor. When drafting the initial complaint for the Alabama Circuit Court, what approach best adheres to Alabama's Rules of Civil Procedure regarding pleading standards? Option A. Draft a complaint that clearly identifies the parties, states the cause of action, e.g., breach of contract negligence, and includes a concise factual narrative describing the general nature of the contractor's alleged failures and the resulting damages, without detailing every piece of evidence. Option B. Draft a complaint that meticulously lists every invoice number, date of service, specific material used, and includes detailed descriptions of every photograph showing damage, aiming to present all potential evidence upfront. Option C. Draft a complaint that simply states the contractor breached the contract and caused damage, without any further factual elaboration, relying on the expectation that discovery will reveal the specifics. Option D. Draft a complaint that alleges the contractor acted in bad faith and intentionally caused damage, even though the client's provided documents suggest the issues were more likely due to poor workmanship rather than malicious intent. The correct answer is A. Draft a complaint that clearly identifies the parties, states the cause of action, e.g., breach of contract negligence, and includes a concise factual narrative describing the general nature of the contractor's alleged failures and the resulting damages, without detailing every piece of evidence. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a lawyer to balance the efficiency of notice pleading, which is the hallmark of Alabama civil procedure, with the need to provide sufficient information to put the opposing party on notice of the claims being asserted. Overly vague pleadings can lead to delays, discovery disputes, and potential dismissal, while overly detailed pleadings can be burdensome and may inadvertently limit the scope of the case. Careful judgment is required to draft a complaint that meets the minimum pleading standards of Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 8a, without becoming a factual recitation that could be challenged as insufficient or overly specific. The best professional practice involves drafting a complaint that states a short and plain claim for relief, providing enough factual detail to give the defendant fair notice of the nature of the claim and the grounds upon which it rests, as required by Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 8a. This approach aligns with Alabama's adoption of notice pleading, which emphasizes the pleading's role in informing the opposing party and the court of the general nature of the action, rather than requiring a detailed factual exposition. This allows for flexibility in developing the case through discovery, an approach that relies solely on conclusory allegations, without any factual support, fails to meet the pleading requirements of Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 8a. Such a pleading does not provide the defendant with fair notice of the claim, making it difficult for them to prepare a defense. This can lead to motions to dismiss for failure to state a claim, causing unnecessary delay and expense. Another incorrect approach is to plead every single factual detail and piece of evidence that might be relevant to the claim. While this might seem thorough, it goes beyond the purpose of notice pleading. Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 8a explicitly calls for short and plain statements. Overly detailed pleadings can be problematic because they may inadvertently limit the plaintiff's ability to present evidence at trial that was not explicitly pleaded, and they can be more susceptible to motions for a more definite statement or even dismissal if a key factual element is omitted from the exhaustive detail. A professional reasoning framework for this situation involves first understanding the core allegations of the client's case. Then, the lawyer must consider the minimum requirements of Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 8a for stating a claim. The lawyer should draft a complaint that articulates the essential elements of the cause of action with enough factual context to inform the defendant of the nature of the dispute, but without delving into evidentiary minutiae. This strikes the appropriate balance between the liberality of notice pleading and the need for a minimally sufficient factual basis. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a plaintiff in Alabama intends to file a lawsuit alleging fraudulent misrepresentation against a former business partner. The plaintiff believes the partner intentionally misled them about the financial health of a joint venture to induce them to invest more capital. However, the plaintiff has not yet obtained all the specific details regarding the exact dates of each alleged misrepresentation, the precise wording used by the partner, or the specific documents that were falsified. What is the most appropriate course of action for the plaintiff's attorney to take when drafting the initial complaint in Alabama? Option A. Plead fraud with speculative allegations based on suspicion, hoping that discovery will confirm these suspicions and provide the required specificity. Option B. Plead fraud by generally stating that the former business partner engaged in fraudulent conduct that caused the plaintiff financial harm, without providing specific details of the misrepresentations. Option C. Plead fraud by alleging the specific misrepresentations made, the approximate timeframes and locations of these misrepresentations, the identity of the speaker and listener, and the intended effect of the misrepresentations, while acknowledging that some minute details may be refined through discovery. Option D. File the complaint with minimal factual allegations regarding fraud and rely entirely on the discovery process to uncover the necessary details to support the claim. The correct answer is C. Plead fraud by alleging the specific misrepresentations made, the approximate timeframes and locations of these misrepresentations, the identity of the speaker and listener, and the intended effect of the misrepresentations, while acknowledging that some minute details may be refined through discovery. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in ensuring that legal pleadings meet the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure's requirements for specificity and particularity, particularly when alleging fraud. Failure to do so can lead to the dismissal of claims, wasted resources, and potential ethical repercussions for the attorney. The attorney must balance the need to provide sufficient detail to put the opposing party on notice with the practical limitations of discovering all facts before filing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves pleading fraud with the highest degree of specificity and particularity reasonably available at the pleading stage. This means identifying the specific misrepresentations made, the speaker of those misrepresentations, the listener, the time and place of the misrepresentations, and the intended effect of those misrepresentations on the plaintiff. This approach aligns directly with Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 9b, which mandates that averments of fraud be stated with particularity. By providing these details, the attorney ensures that the opposing party has adequate notice of the allegations, allowing for a meaningful response, and satisfies the court's requirement for a well-pleaded claim. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to plead fraud in general terms, stating only that the defendant committed fraud without detailing the specific acts. This fails to meet the particularity requirement of Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 9b. The opposing party would not have sufficient notice of the alleged fraudulent conduct, hindering their ability to prepare a defense. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the discovery process to uncover the specifics of the fraud. While discovery is crucial for obtaining evidence, the initial pleading must still contain sufficient particularity to survive a motion to dismiss. Waiting for discovery to flesh out the allegations is a violation of the pleading rules and risks the claim being dismissed before any evidence can be gathered. A third incorrect approach is to plead fraud with a level of detail that is speculative or based on mere suspicion rather than a good faith belief in the facts. Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 11 requires that pleadings be based on a reasonable inquiry into the facts. Pleading fraud without a factual basis, even if seemingly specific, can lead to sanctions and undermine the integrity of the legal process. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should first conduct a thorough pre-filing investigation to gather as many specific facts about the alleged fraud as possible. This includes reviewing documents, interviewing witnesses, and consulting with experts if necessary. When drafting the complaint, the attorney must meticulously apply Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 9b, ensuring each element of fraud is addressed with specific factual allegations. If certain details are genuinely unknown at the pleading stage, the attorney should articulate why they are unknown and what steps will be taken to discover them, while still providing the maximum specificity achievable. This diligent approach protects the client's claim and upholds professional obligations. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County, Alabama, a plaintiff filed a complaint on January 15, 2024. The plaintiff's attorney made diligent but unsuccessful attempts to serve the defendant, encountering issues with the defendant's known address. The 120-day period for service under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 4I will expire on May 14, 2024. If the attorney files a motion for an extension of time to serve the defendant on May 10, 2024, detailing the efforts made and the reasons for the delay, what is the most appropriate course of action for the court to consider regarding the service of process? Option A. Deny the motion for an extension of time, as service must be completed within the original 120-day period regardless of attempts made. Option B. Dismiss the case immediately due to the impending expiration of the 120-day service period without considering any motion for extension. Option C. Grant the motion for an extension of time to serve the defendant, provided the attorney demonstrates good cause for the delay in service. Option D. Allow the plaintiff to refile the complaint to restart the 120-day service period, effectively nullifying the original filing date for service purposes. The correct answer is C. Grant the motion for an extension of time to serve the defendant, provided the attorney demonstrates good cause for the delay in service. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a recurring issue in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County, Alabama, where the timeliness of service of process is impacting case progression. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of Alabama rules of civil procedure regarding the commencement of actions and the subsequent obligations of plaintiffs to effectuate service within a specified time frame. Failure to adhere to these rules can lead to dismissal of the action, potentially prejudicing the plaintiff's ability to pursue their claim. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for efficient case management with the plaintiff's right to have their case heard. The correct approach involves meticulously calculating the service period based on the filing date and the specific rules governing service in Alabama. Under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 4I, a plaintiff must serve the defendant within 120 days after the filing of the complaint. If the complaint is filed on January 15, 2024, the 120-day period concludes on May 14, 2024. If the plaintiff, through their attorney, diligently attempts service and files a motion for an extension of time with a showing of good cause before the expiration of the 120-day period, the court may grant such an extension. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the procedural safeguards provided by the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, ensuring that plaintiffs are afforded a reasonable opportunity to serve defendants, while also promoting timely resolution of disputes. The proactive filing of a motion for an extension with a justification demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to proceeding with the litigation, which is favored by the courts. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the 120-day period is absolute and that any service attempted after this date, even with a subsequent motion for extension, is automatically invalid. This fails to recognize the provision within Rule 4I that allows for extensions upon a showing of good cause. Another incorrect approach would be to wait until after the 120-day period has expired to file a motion for an extension, without having made any prior attempts at service or demonstrating any diligence. This would likely be viewed by the court as a failure to prosecute the action diligently and would not meet the good cause requirement. A further incorrect approach would be to simply refile the complaint after the 120-day period has expired, hoping to restart the clock. This is procedurally unsound and would likely be dismissed as an attempt to circumvent the rules of service and potentially the statute of limitations, depending on the nature of the claim. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the relevant Alabama rules of civil procedure, particularly those pertaining to service of process and the commencement of actions. Upon filing a complaint, an attorney should immediately calendar the service deadline and begin planning for service. If challenges to service are anticipated, or if the 120-day period is approaching without successful service, the attorney should proactively consult the rules regarding extensions and prepare a motion for an extension of time, detailing the efforts made and the reasons for the delay. This proactive and rule-compliant approach is essential for protecting the client's interests and ensuring the efficient administration of justice. Question 11. Quality control measures reveal that a law firm representing a plaintiff in an ongoing personal injury lawsuit in Alabama has failed to include a crucial element of damages in the initial complaint, which was filed 6 months ago. The opposing party has since filed an answer to the original complaint. The firm has now identified this omission and wishes to amend the complaint to include the previously omitted damages. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm to take under Alabama civil procedure law? Option A. File a motion for leave to amend the complaint with the Alabama court, providing a detailed explanation of the omission and why the amendment is necessary, while also addressing any potential prejudice to the defendant. Option B. Immediately file an amended complaint with the court, assuming the court will allow the correction given the nature of the omission. Option C. Proceed with the litigation based on the original complaint, advising the client that the omitted damages cannot be pursued due to the procedural oversight. Option D. Contact the opposing counsel directly and request their agreement to amend the complaint without formal court involvement. The correct answer is A. File a motion for leave to amend the complaint with the Alabama court, providing a detailed explanation of the omission and why the amendment is necessary, while also addressing any potential prejudice to the defendant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in litigation where a party discovers new information or wishes to refine their legal claims after the initial pleadings have been filed. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to present a complete and accurate case with the procedural rules governing amendments, particularly when the opposing party might be prejudiced by the delay or the nature of the proposed changes. Adhering strictly to Alabama rules of civil procedure is paramount to ensure the amendment is permissible and does not unduly disrupt the litigation process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves carefully reviewing the Alabama rules of civil procedure, specifically Rule 15, which governs amendments to pleadings. This rule generally allows amendments freely when justice so requires, especially early in the litigation. However, it also outlines conditions under which amendments may be denied, such as undue delay, bad faith, or prejudice to the opposing party. A thorough understanding of the rule's provisions, including the relation-back doctrine for statute of limitations issues, is crucial. The professional must assess whether the proposed amendment meets these criteria, considering the timing, the reason for the amendment, and the potential impact on the opposing party's ability to defend itself. If the amendment is sought after a responsive pleading has been filed, leave of court is generally required, and the court will consider factors like diligence and prejudice. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that amendments are always permissible without court intervention, even after a responsive pleading has been filed. This ignores the requirement for leave of court under Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 15. A. When a responsive pleading has been served, and it fails to consider the court's discretion to deny amendments based on factors like undue delay or prejudice. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to amend the pleading by simply filing a new document without seeking leave of court or providing notice to the opposing party, which is procedurally deficient and likely to be rejected. A third incorrect approach would be to proceed with the litigation based on the original pleading, even after discovering significant new information that fundamentally alters the claims or defenses, thereby failing to present a complete and accurate case and potentially violating ethical duties to the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach amendments by first consulting the relevant Alabama rules of civil procedure. They must then objectively assess the proposed amendment against the rule's requirements, considering the stage of litigation, the reasons for the amendment, and potential prejudice to the opposing party. If leave of court is required, a formal motion should be filed, supported by a clear explanation of the necessity and timeliness of the amendment, and addressing any potential prejudice. Open communication with opposing counsel regarding proposed amendments can also facilitate the process and avoid unnecessary disputes. Question 12. System analysis indicates that understanding the foundational shifts in legal process is critical for effective practice. Considering the historical trajectory of civil litigation in Alabama, which of the following best characterizes the primary impetus behind the evolution of its civil procedure from earlier common law forms? Option A. A primary focus on codifying and expanding the substantive rights of individuals, leading to a parallel need for more complex procedural mechanisms to adjudicate these new rights. Option B. An effort to preserve the historical traditions and intricate forms of action inherited from English common law, ensuring consistency with centuries-old legal precedent. Option C. A deliberate movement to simplify pleading requirements, emphasize notice to opposing parties, and promote the efficient resolution of disputes on their merits, moving away from the strict technicalities of common law pleading. Option D. A gradual adoption of procedural innovations, driven solely by the increasing complexity of economic transactions and the need for specialized courts to handle them. The correct answer is C. A deliberate movement to simplify pleading requirements, emphasize notice to opposing parties, and promote the efficient resolution of disputes on their merits, moving away from the strict technicalities of common law pleading. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge in understanding the foundational principles that shaped Alabama's civil procedure, particularly the shift from common law pleading to more modern, streamlined approaches. This requires not just memorization of historical facts, but an appreciation of the underlying policy reasons for procedural reform. A deep understanding of this historical development is crucial for practicing attorneys in Alabama to effectively navigate and interpret current procedural rules, ensuring efficient and just outcomes for their clients. The correct approach involves recognizing that the historical development of civil procedure in Alabama, like many other jurisdictions, was driven by a desire to move away from the rigid and often arcane technicalities of common law pleading. This reform aimed to simplify the process, focus on the substantive merits of a case, and make the courts more accessible. Understanding this evolution helps explain why modern rules emphasize notice pleading and allow for broader discovery, contrasting with the historical emphasis on precise, formal allegations required to survive a demurrer. This historical context is directly reflected in the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure, which were designed to embody these reforms. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the procedural rules as they exist today, without considering the historical context that led to their creation. This overlooks the rationale behind the rules and can lead to a superficial understanding, potentially resulting in misinterpretations or the inability to adapt to evolving legal interpretations. Another incorrect approach would be to conflate the development of civil procedure with the development of substantive law. While related, they are distinct. Procedural law governs the mechanics of litigation, while substantive law defines rights and obligations. Focusing on the historical development of substantive doctrines, such as property rights or contract law, would not address the specific question about the evolution of the process by which disputes are resolved in Alabama courts. Finally, an approach that emphasizes the purely academic or theoretical aspects of legal history without connecting them to practical application in Alabama courts would also be insufficient. The historical development of civil procedure is relevant because it informs current practice and the interpretation of existing rules. Professionals should approach such questions by first identifying the core subject matter, the historical development of civil procedure in a specific jurisdiction. They should then consider the overarching goals of procedural reform, such as efficiency, fairness, and accessibility. Finally, They should connect these historical drivers to the specific rules and practices prevalent in the given jurisdiction, understanding how past challenges led to present solutions. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Alabama is eager to initiate a lawsuit against a business partner for breach of contract and seeks the quickest possible resolution. The attorney is aware of several procedural shortcuts that might expedite the initial stages of litigation. Considering the fundamental importance of civil procedure in the Alabama legal system, which of the following approaches best safeguards the client's interests and upholds legal integrity? Option A. Proceed with filing the complaint and seek an immediate ex parte order for discovery, arguing that the urgency of the client's situation justifies bypassing standard notice requirements for initial discovery. Option B. File the complaint immediately and attempt to serve the defendant informally through a mutual acquaintance, as this may be faster than formal service, and the client is primarily concerned with speed. Option C. Diligently adhere to all Alabama rules of civil procedure regarding the filing of the complaint, proper service of process on the defendant, and timely notification of all required parties, ensuring all jurisdictional prerequisites are met before proceeding. Option D. Draft a brief, informal complaint that outlines the general nature of the dispute, but omits detailed factual allegations, believing that the court will understand the core issue, and allow for amendments later to save time on initial drafting. Correct answer is C. Diligently adhere to all Alabama rules of civil procedure regarding the filing of the complaint, proper service of process on the defendant, and timely notification of all required parties, ensuring all jurisdictional prerequisites are met before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an attorney to balance the client's immediate desire for a swift resolution with the fundamental procedural requirements that ensure fairness and due process under Alabama law. Misunderstanding or disregarding these procedural steps can lead to significant negative consequences for the client, including dismissal of the case, loss of claims, and potential ethical violations for the attorney. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities effectively. The correct approach emphasizes the foundational role of civil procedure in the Alabama legal system. By meticulously adhering to the Alabama rules of civil procedure, including proper service of process and timely filing of pleadings, the attorney ensures that the opposing party receives adequate notice and an opportunity to respond. This procedural integrity is not merely a technicality, it is essential for due process, as guaranteed by the Alabama Constitution and federal due process principles. Following these rules establishes the court's jurisdiction over the parties and the subject matter, preventing procedural defects that could invalidate any subsequent judgment. This approach upholds the attorney's duty to represent the client competently and diligently, while also respecting the court's authority and the principles of justice. An incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over procedural correctness fails to recognize the critical importance of jurisdiction and due process. For instance, attempting to initiate a lawsuit without proper service of process on the defendant, or filing a complaint that does not meet the minimum pleading requirements under Alabama law, risks the case being dismissed for lack of jurisdiction or failure to state a claim. This not only harms the client's legal position, but also violates the attorney's ethical obligations to provide competent representation and to uphold the integrity of the legal process. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established procedural rules, such as attempting to obtain a default judgment without demonstrating proper service, or failing to allow the defendant the statutorily prescribed time to respond, undermines the adversarial system. This can lead to the judgment being vacated, further delaying resolution and potentially incurring additional costs for the client. It also demonstrates a disregard for the procedural safeguards designed to prevent unfair outcomes. The professional decision-making framework for such situations involves a thorough understanding of the Alabama rules of civil procedure and their underlying purpose. Attorneys must prioritize procedural compliance from the outset, recognizing that these rules are the bedrock of a fair and functional legal system. This involves proactive planning, careful attention to detail in drafting and filing documents, and diligent execution of service requirements. When in doubt, consulting the rules or seeking guidance from experienced colleagues is essential to ensure that all procedural steps are correctly taken, thereby protecting the client's interests and maintaining the integrity of the legal proceedings. Question 14. What factors determine whether an Alabama Circuit Court has subject matter jurisdiction over a civil dispute concerning a breach of contract for services performed entirely within Jefferson County, Alabama, where the amount in controversy exceeds $10,000? Option A. The residency of the plaintiff and the defendant and the location of their respective businesses. Option B. The amount of damages sought, regardless of the type of claim. Option C. The nature of the claim, the relief sought, and the statutory grant of jurisdiction to Alabama Circuit Courts. Option D. The agreement of the parties to litigate in an Alabama Circuit Court. The correct answer is C. The nature of the claim, the relief sought, and the statutory grant of jurisdiction to Alabama Circuit Courts. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama civil procedure where a plaintiff files a lawsuit in a state court that may not have the proper subject matter jurisdiction. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying the basis for jurisdiction and ensuring the lawsuit proceeds in the correct forum. Failure to do so can lead to dismissal, wasted resources, and prejudice to the parties involved. Careful judgment is required to analyze the nature of the claim and the relief sought against the jurisdictional rules established by Alabama law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough examination of the Alabama rules of civil procedure and relevant Alabama case law to determine if the Circuit Court of Alabama has the authority to hear the specific type of case presented. This includes assessing whether the claim falls within the exclusive jurisdiction of another Alabama court, e.g., probate court for certain estate matters, juvenile court for juvenile cases, or if it is a matter that the circuit court is empowered to adjudicate. The justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental principle that a court must possess subject matter jurisdiction to render a valid judgment. Alabama Code Section 12-11-30 outlines the general original jurisdiction of circuit courts, and understanding the boundaries of this jurisdiction is paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that simply filing in a state circuit court automatically confers subject matter jurisdiction. This fails to acknowledge that Alabama law, like all jurisdictions, has specific rules about which courts can hear which types of cases. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the residency of the parties or the location where the cause of action arose, as these factors primarily relate to personal jurisdiction, not subject matter jurisdiction. While important, they do not establish the court's power over the subject matter of the dispute. A third incorrect approach is to rely on the opposing party to raise the issue of subject matter jurisdiction. While the opposing party may do so, it is the plaintiff's responsibility to initiate the lawsuit in a court that has proper jurisdiction. Waiting for an objection is a failure to meet the initial pleading requirements and can lead to unnecessary procedural delays and costs. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes jurisdictional analysis at the outset of any litigation. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the claim and the relief sought. 2. Consulting the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure and relevant statutes to determine the proper venue and court for such claims. 3. Analyzing whether the claim falls within the exclusive or concurrent jurisdiction of any Alabama court. 4. If subject matter jurisdiction is questionable, conducting further research into Alabama case law interpreting jurisdictional statutes. 5. Filing the action in a court that demonstrably possesses subject matter jurisdiction. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a law firm in Birmingham, Alabama, is representing a client who was injured by a defective product manufactured by Gadget Corp., a company incorporated and with its principal place of business in Delaware. Gadget Corp. does not have any offices, employees, or registered agents in Alabama. However, Gadget Corp.'s products are widely distributed throughout the United States, and its products are sold in Alabama through independent retailers who are not agents of Gadget Corp. The injured client purchased the defective product in Alabama. Considering Alabama civil procedure law, which of the following best describes the jurisdictional analysis required to determine if Alabama courts can exercise personal jurisdiction over Gadget Corp.? Option A. Conclude that personal jurisdiction is lacking because Gadget Corp. has no physical presence, offices, or registered agents in Alabama, and its sales are conducted through independent retailers. Option B. Determine personal jurisdiction based primarily on the convenience to the Alabama plaintiff and the fact that the injury occurred within Alabama, regardless of Gadget Corp's direct engagement with the state. Option C. Assert personal jurisdiction over Gadget Corp because its products are sold in Alabama, and the plaintiff purchased the defective product within the state, thereby establishing sufficient minimum contacts. Option D. Analyze whether Gadget Corp purposefully availed itself of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, such that it could reasonably anticipate being hailed into an Alabama court, and whether the lawsuit arises out of or relates to those activities. The correct answer is D. Analyze whether Gadget Corp purposefully availed itself of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, such that it could reasonably anticipate being hailed into an Alabama court, and whether the lawsuit arises out of or relates to those activities. Explanation. System analysis indicates that this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the nuanced application of Alabama's long-arm statute and the constitutional due process requirements for establishing personal jurisdiction over a non-resident defendant. Attorneys must carefully assess the defendant's contacts with Alabama to determine if they are sufficient to subject the defendant to the state's courts without violating fundamental fairness. The core of the challenge lies in distinguishing between isolated or fortuitous contacts and those that demonstrate purposeful availment of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, thereby invoking the benefits and protections of its laws. The best approach involves a thorough examination of the defendant's actions in relation to the lawsuit's subject matter. This includes analyzing whether the defendant purposefully directed activities towards Alabama, whether the lawsuit arises out of or relates to those activities, and whether the exercise of jurisdiction is reasonable and consistent with traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. Specifically, the analysis should focus on whether the defendant initiated or solicited business in Alabama, entered into contracts with Alabama residents to be performed in Alabama, or otherwise deliberately engaged with the state in a manner that would make it foreseeable that they could be hailed into an Alabama court. This aligns with Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 4.2, which permits service of process on any person who may be constitutionally subject to the service of process. The constitutional standard, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, requires minimum contacts such that the defendant should reasonably anticipate being hailed into court there. An incorrect approach would be to assume jurisdiction exists solely because the defendant's product or service reached Alabama, regardless of the defendant's intent or level of engagement. This fails to recognize that mere stream of commerce effects are insufficient without additional evidence of purposeful direction towards the forum state. Another incorrect approach is to rely on the convenience of the plaintiff as the primary factor in asserting jurisdiction. While convenience can be a component of reasonableness, it cannot substitute for the defendant's minimum contacts with the forum. Finally, an approach that ignores the specific nature of the defendant's contacts and broadly asserts jurisdiction based on a general business presence, without a clear nexus to the cause of action, would also be legally flawed. Such an approach risks overextending Alabama's jurisdictional reach beyond constitutional limits. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a rigorous, fact-specific inquiry into the defendant's contacts with Alabama. This involves 1. Identifying all potential bases for jurisdiction under Alabama law, particularly Rule 4.2. Applying the constitutional minimum contacts test, focusing on purposeful availment and foreseeability. 3. Evaluating the reasonableness of exercising jurisdiction, considering factors like the burden on the defendant, Alabama's interest in the litigation, and the plaintiff's interest in obtaining relief. And 4. Meticulously documenting the analysis and the factual support for each element of the jurisdictional test. Question 16. System analysis indicates that a plaintiff, a resident of Jefferson County, Alabama, has filed a lawsuit in the Circuit Court of Jefferson County against a defendant corporation whose principal place of business is in Mobile County, Alabama. The plaintiff's claim arises from a single business transaction that occurred entirely within Baldwin County, Alabama, and the defendant corporation has no offices, employees, or registered agents in Jefferson County, nor has it conducted any business there related to this transaction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the defendant corporation's legal counsel to take regarding territorial jurisdiction in this Alabama civil procedure matter? Option A. File a motion to transfer the case to Baldwin County, where the transaction occurred, arguing that this county is the most appropriate venue for the dispute. Option B. Advise the defendant to appear and defend the lawsuit in Jefferson County, as the plaintiff's residence in Jefferson County is sufficient to establish jurisdiction over the defendant for any civil matter. Option C. File a motion to dismiss for improper venue, asserting that Jefferson County is not a convenient forum for the litigation due to the defendant's principal place of business being in Mobile County and the transaction occurring in Baldwin County. Option D. File a motion to dismiss for lack of personal jurisdiction, arguing that the defendant corporation lacks sufficient minimum contacts with Jefferson County, Alabama, and that the cause of action does not arise from any activities conducted by the defendant within Jefferson County. The correct answer is D. File a motion to dismiss for lack of personal jurisdiction, arguing that the defendant corporation lacks sufficient minimum contacts with Jefferson County, Alabama, and that the cause of action does not arise from any activities conducted by the defendant within Jefferson County. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama civil litigation, where a plaintiff initiates a lawsuit in a county where the defendant has minimal or no physical presence, potentially leading to a jurisdictional dispute. The core professional challenge lies in accurately assessing whether the chosen venue satisfies Alabama's territorial jurisdiction requirements, which are designed to ensure fairness and prevent undue burden on defendants. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to dismissal of the case, wasted resources, and potential malpractice claims. Careful judgment is required to analyze the defendant's contacts with the forum county in relation to the cause of action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of the defendant's contacts with the forum county in Alabama, specifically examining whether these contacts are sufficient to establish personal jurisdiction under Alabama law. This requires determining if the defendant has purposefully availed itself of the privilege of conducting activities within Alabama, thereby invoking the benefits and protections of its laws. The analysis must then consider whether the cause of action arises out of or relates to those specific contacts. If the defendant's activities are substantial and continuous within the county, or if the cause of action directly stems from the defendant's limited but purposeful actions within the county, then jurisdiction is likely proper. This aligns with Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure 4.2, which governs the exercise of in personam jurisdiction and requires a nexus between the defendant's forum-related activities and the plaintiff's claim. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume jurisdiction is proper solely because the plaintiff resides in the county where the lawsuit is filed. While a plaintiff's residence can be a factor in venue, it does not automatically confer territorial jurisdiction over a defendant who lacks sufficient minimum contacts with that specific Alabama county. This approach fails to consider the defendant's due process rights and the constitutional limitations on a state court's power over an out-of-state defendant. Another incorrect approach is to file suit in the county where the plaintiff experienced the alleged harm, without independently verifying the defendant's specific contacts with that county. While the location of harm is relevant, it is not dispositive if the defendant's actions that caused the harm did not occur in, or were not directed towards, that particular Alabama county. This overlooks the requirement that the defendant must have purposefully directed its activities towards the forum. A third incorrect approach is to rely on the convenience of the plaintiff's attorney as the primary basis for choosing the county. While attorney convenience is a practical consideration for case management, it holds no legal weight in establishing territorial jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is determined by the defendant's connection to the forum, not the plaintiff's attorney's preference. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework when assessing territorial jurisdiction in Alabama. This framework begins with identifying the relevant Alabama rules of civil procedure, particularly Rule 4.2, and relevant case law interpreting these rules. The next step is to meticulously investigate the defendant's contacts with the forum county, distinguishing between general jurisdiction, continuous and systematic contacts, and specific jurisdiction, contacts related to the cause of action. The analysis must then connect these contacts to the plaintiff's claims, ensuring the cause of action arises from or relates to the defendant's forum-related activities. If these elements are not clearly established, the professional should consider alternative forums where jurisdiction is more certain or advise the client accordingly, rather than proceeding with a potentially flawed jurisdictional basis. Question 17. Strategic planning requires an Alabama attorney to determine the proper forum for a lawsuit. If a client wishes to sue a company incorporated in Delaware with its principal place of business in Texas, and the lawsuit involves a dispute over a contract governed by Alabama common law, what is the most appropriate jurisdictional analysis to undertake before filing in federal court in Alabama? Option A. Analyze whether the claims arise under the Constitution, laws, or treaties of the United States, or if the parties are citizens of different states and the amount in controversy exceeds $75,000 as per federal jurisdictional statutes. Option B. File in federal court because the defendant is a large, out-of-state corporation, which generally implies federal jurisdiction. Option C. Assume federal jurisdiction is appropriate because the contract dispute might involve interstate commerce, which is a federal concern. Option D. File in federal court and allow the judge to determine if jurisdiction exists based on the case's complexity. The correct answer is A. Analyze whether the claims arise under the Constitution, laws, or treaties of the United States, or if the parties are citizens of different states, and the amount in controversy exceeds $75,000 as per federal jurisdictional statutes. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of jurisdictional boundaries to ensure legal proceedings are properly initiated and maintained. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a plaintiff's attorney must accurately determine whether a federal court in Alabama has the proper authority to hear a case, or if it should be filed in an Alabama state court. Misjudging jurisdiction can lead to dismissal, wasted resources, and potential malpractice claims. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the nature of the claims, and the parties involved to ascertain if federal question jurisdiction or diversity jurisdiction, as defined by 28 U.S.C. Section 1331 and 28 U.S.C. Section 1332, respectively, is present. If the lawsuit involves a claim arising under the Constitution, laws, or treaties of the United States, federal question jurisdiction may be established. Alternatively, if the lawsuit involves citizens of different states and the amount in controversy exceeds $75,000, diversity jurisdiction may be present. The attorney must meticulously examine the complaint to confirm these elements are met before filing in federal court. An incorrect approach would be to assume federal jurisdiction exists simply because the defendant is a large, out-of-state corporation, without verifying the amount in controversy requirement for diversity jurisdiction. This fails to adhere to the specific statutory requirements for diversity jurisdiction under 28 U.S.C. Section 1332, which mandates that the amount in controversy must exceed $75,000. Filing without meeting this threshold is a jurisdictional defect that will likely result in dismissal. Another incorrect approach would be to file a case in federal court based solely on the belief that federal law might be tangentially relevant to a state law claim, without the claim itself arising under federal law. This overlooks the requirement for federal question jurisdiction under 28 U.S.C. Section 1331, which requires the plaintiff's cause of action to be created by federal law. Merely mentioning federal law in passing, or as a defense, does not confer federal question jurisdiction. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to file in federal court without conducting any preliminary analysis of the potential jurisdictional grounds, hoping that the court will somehow find a basis for its authority. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and professional responsibility. Attorneys have an affirmative duty to ensure the courts in which they file have proper jurisdiction, as mandated by the rules of civil procedure and ethical obligations to clients. The professional reasoning process for such situations should begin with a clear identification of all potential claims and the citizenship of all parties. Next, the attorney must research whether any of the claims arise under federal law. If not, they must then assess whether diversity jurisdiction is met by examining the citizenship of the parties and the good faith estimate of the amount in controversy. If neither federal question nor diversity jurisdiction is clearly established, the case should be filed in the appropriate Alabama state court. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a defendant, sued in the Circuit Court of Mobile County, Alabama, believes that the chosen venue is inconvenient for key witnesses and would significantly hinder the promotion of the ends of justice. The defendant has been properly served with the complaint. What is the most appropriate procedural step for the defendant to take under Alabama civil procedure law? Option A. File a motion to transfer venue to a more convenient circuit court within Alabama supported by evidence demonstrating the convenience of witnesses and the promotion of the ends of justice. Option B. Wait until the trial begins to raise the issue of inconvenient venue. Option C. File a motion to dismiss the case based on a lack of jurisdiction. Option D. File an answer on the merits to the complaint without raising any objection to the venue. The correct answer is A. File a motion to transfer venue to a more convenient circuit court within Alabama, supported by evidence demonstrating the convenience of witnesses and the promotion of the ends of justice. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama civil litigation where a defendant, after being served, believes the chosen venue is inconvenient and potentially disadvantageous. The professional challenge lies in navigating the procedural rules for challenging venue and seeking a transfer, ensuring compliance with Alabama rules of civil procedure while advocating for the client's best interests. Misunderstanding or misapplying these rules can lead to waiver of the venue objection or denial of a transfer motion, impacting the efficiency and fairness of the litigation. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach involves filing a timely motion to transfer venue under Rule 17 of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure. This rule specifically addresses the transfer of civil actions from one circuit court to another within Alabama. The motion must be supported by a showing that the transfer is necessary for the convenience of witnesses or the promotion of the ends of justice. This approach is correct because it directly utilizes the procedural mechanism provided by Alabama law for addressing improper venue or seeking a more convenient forum, thereby preserving the defendant's rights and adhering to established legal procedure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply ignore the venue issue and proceed with filing an answer on the merits without raising the venue objection. This would likely result in a waiver of the right to challenge venue under Alabama law. As Rule 12H of the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure generally treats objections to venue as waived if not asserted in a responsive pleading or a motion filed before the responsive pleading. Another incorrect approach would be to file a motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction instead of a motion to transfer venue. While a defendant can challenge venue through a motion to dismiss, framing it solely as a lack of jurisdiction is procedurally inaccurate if the court otherwise has subject matter and personal jurisdiction over the defendant and the claims. This mischaracterization could lead to confusion and potential denial of the relief sought, as the proper remedy for an inconvenient venue is transfer, not dismissal. A further incorrect approach would be to wait until trial to raise the venue issue. This is procedurally deficient because venue objections must be raised at the earliest opportunity. Waiting until trial would be considered a waiver of the objection, and the court would likely refuse to consider it, forcing the defendant to proceed in the original, potentially inconvenient, venue. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach venue challenges by first identifying the specific Alabama Rule of Civil Procedure governing venue and transfer, Rule 17. They must then assess whether the current venue is improper or merely inconvenient. If improper, a motion to dismiss or transfer may be appropriate. If inconvenient, a motion to transfer based on convenience of witnesses or the ends of justice is the correct path. Crucially, all venue objections must be raised promptly, typically in the initial responsive pleading or a motion filed prior to that pleading, to avoid waiver. A thorough understanding of the procedural deadlines and requirements under the Alabama Rules of Civil Procedure is paramount. Question 19. System analysis indicates that an Alabama resident has initiated a lawsuit in an Alabama state court against a business entity located in California. This California business operates solely online, selling custom-designed widgets. While the business has a publicly accessible website, it does not have any physical offices, employees, or registered agents in Alabama. The Alabama resident claims to have purchased a widget through the business's website, which subsequently proved to be defective. The California business argues that Alabama courts lack personal jurisdiction over it. Under Alabama civil procedure law, what is the most appropriate initial step for the Alabama resident's attorney to take to establish jurisdiction? Option A. Argue that because the plaintiff is an Alabama resident and the transaction occurred online, Alabama courts automatically have jurisdiction over any defendant who sells goods to Alabama residents. Option B. Proceed with litigation on the merits of the defective widget claim, deferring any jurisdictional challenges until after a potential judgment, as the convenience of the Alabama plaintiff should be paramount. Option C. File a motion to compel discovery from the California business regarding its general business operations, assuming that any discovery will eventually reveal sufficient contacts for jurisdiction. Option D. Conduct a detailed factual investigation into the nature and extent of the California business's online interactions with Alabama residents, specifically focusing on whether the business purposefully directed its activities towards Alabama, solicited business from Alabama residents, or derived substantial revenue from Alabama to demonstrate minimum contacts. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed factual investigation into the nature and extent of the California business's online interactions with Alabama residents, specifically focusing on whether the business purposefully directed its activities towards Alabama, solicited business from Alabama residents, or derived substantial revenue from Alabama to demonstrate minimum contacts. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's rules of civil procedure regarding personal jurisdiction, specifically the concept of minimum contacts and the Due Process Clause. A lawyer must accurately assess whether a defendant, who has no physical presence in Alabama but engages in online business interactions with Alabama residents, is subject to the state's jurisdiction. Misinterpreting these rules can lead to significant procedural errors, wasted resources, and potential malpractice claims. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the defendant's contacts with Alabama to determine if they have purposefully availed themselves of the privilege of conducting activities within the state, thus invoking the benefits and protections of its laws. This requires examining the nature and quality of the defendant's online interactions, such as whether they actively solicit business from Alabama residents, enter into contracts with them, or derive substantial revenue from goods or services provided to Alabama. If these contacts are sufficient to establish minimum contacts, such that the defendant should reasonably anticipate being hailed into an Alabama court, then personal jurisdiction is likely proper. This aligns with the due process requirements established by the U.S. Supreme Court and interpreted under Alabama law, ensuring fairness to the defendant. An incorrect approach would be to assume jurisdiction solely based on the fact that an Alabama resident is the plaintiff, or that the defendant's website is accessible in Alabama. The accessibility of a website alone does not automatically confer jurisdiction. The website must be interactive and demonstrate a clear intent to conduct business within Alabama. Another incorrect approach would be to file suit in Alabama without conducting a preliminary jurisdictional analysis, hoping to address the issue later. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adhere to the procedural safeguards designed to protect defendants from being sued in inconvenient or unfair forums. Furthermore, relying on outdated or generalized interpretations of internet jurisdiction, without considering the specific facts and the evolving legal landscape under Alabama's procedural rules, would also be a failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive factual investigation of the defendant's activities. This should be followed by a rigorous legal analysis of those facts against the established principles of personal jurisdiction under Alabama law, including the minimum contacts test and the purposeful availment doctrine. If there is doubt, seeking clarification through a motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction or conducting further discovery on jurisdictional facts would be prudent steps before proceeding with the merits of the case. Question 20. System analysis indicates that a defendant in an Alabama civil action seeks dismissal based on forum non-convenience. The plaintiff, a resident of Georgia, filed suit in Alabama against a Florida-based corporation for a breach of contract that occurred during negotiations conducted entirely via email and phone calls between the plaintiff's Georgia office and the defendant's Florida office. The contract was to be performed in Texas. The defendant argues that Florida is a more convenient forum. To support this, the defendant provides the following data. 90% of the defendant's employees who participated in contract negotiations reside in Florida. The estimated cost to depose these Florida-based employees in Alabama is $750 per hour per deponent, for a total estimated cost of $45,000. The estimated cost to depose these employees in Florida is $250 per hour per deponent, for a total estimated cost of $15,000. Defendant's primary place of business is in Florida. The defendant asserts that Alabama courts have no specific connection to the dispute. The plaintiff counters that Alabama is convenient because their Alabama-based attorney is located there, and the plaintiff has a minor business interest in Alabama. Assuming the court has jurisdiction over the parties and the subject matter, and that a Florida court would have jurisdiction and would entertain the action, what is the most appropriate quantitative approach for the court to consider when evaluating the forum non-convenience motion? Option A. Calculate a weighted convenience score for each forum by assigning numerical values to the private and public interest factors, considering the cost savings and witness availability in Florida, and compare these scores to determine if the balance strongly favors dismissal. Option B. Deny the motion because the plaintiff chose Alabama and has an attorney there, and the defendant has not provided evidence of extreme hardship, only inconvenience. Option C. Dismiss the case solely based on the fact that the defendant's primary place of business is in Florida and the majority of their employees involved are located there, without further quantitative analysis. Option D. Focus on the plaintiff's business interest in Alabama, however minor, and the presence of their attorney, as these factors outweigh the defendant's quantitative data regarding witness costs and location. Correct answer is A. Calculate a weighted convenience score for each forum by assigning numerical values to the private and public interest factors, considering the cost savings and witness availability in Florida, and compare these scores to determine if the balance strongly favors dismissal. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in applying the doctrine of forum non-convenience under Alabama law. The core difficulty lies in balancing the plaintiff's right to choose a forum with the court's discretion to dismiss a case when an alternative, more convenient forum exists and is adequate. The defendant's motion introduces a complex factual matrix requiring a quantitative assessment of factors, making a purely qualitative analysis insufficient. Professionals must navigate the specific Alabama rules of civil procedure and relevant case law to determine if the balance of factors strongly favors dismissal, ensuring that the decision is not arbitrary but grounded in established legal principles and a thorough, data-driven evaluation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a detailed, quantitative assessment of the private and public interest factors outlined in Alabama case law concerning forum non-convenience. This includes assigning numerical weights or scores to factors such as the relative ease of access to sources of proof, availability of compulsory process for attendance of unwilling witnesses, the cost of obtaining attendance of willing witnesses, the possibility of view of premises if appropriate, and all other practical problems that make trial of a case easy, expeditious, and inexpensive. For public interest factors, this would involve quantifying the administrative difficulties flowing from court congestion, the local interest in having localized controversies decided at home, the interest in having the trial of a diversity case in a forum that is at home with the law that must govern the action, and the avoidance of unnecessary problems in conflict of laws or in the application of foreign law. Defendant must demonstrate that the balance of these factors strongly favors the alternative forum, often requiring a calculation of a convenience score or a weighted average. For instance, if the defendant can show that 80% of key witnesses reside in the alternative forum and the cost of transporting them to Alabama is $50, $000 per witness, while the cost in the alternative forum is $500, this quantitative data strongly supports dismissal. The court's decision must then be based on this demonstrably weighted analysis, aligning with the Alabama Supreme Court's emphasis on a thorough, fact-specific inquiry. Incorrect approaches analysis, an approach that relies solely on a qualitative assessment of convenience factors without attempting to quantify them, is professionally deficient. For example, simply stating that most witnesses are in Florida without providing estimated numbers, travel costs, or the impact on trial efficiency fails to meet the burden of proof required for forum non-convenience. This approach risks an arbitrary decision by the court, as it lacks the objective data necessary to demonstrate that the alternative forum is clearly more convenient. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the plaintiff's convenience without adequately considering the public interest factors. While the plaintiff's choice of forum is a significant consideration, the doctrine of forum non-convenience explicitly requires a balancing of both private and public interests. Ignoring the court's docket congestion, the local interest in the dispute, or the complexity of applying foreign law, would be a failure to adhere to the established legal framework in Alabama. Finally, an approach that miscalculates or misapplies the relevant Alabama rules of civil procedure or case law regarding forum non-convenience is fundamentally flawed. For instance, incorrectly applying the standard of proof or misinterpreting the types of evidence that can be considered to weigh the convenience factors would lead to an improper recommendation or ruling, failing to uphold the integrity of the judicial process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, data-driven decision-making framework when evaluating forum non-convenience motions. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant private and public interest factors as defined by Alabama law. 2. Gathering specific quantifiable data for each factor, e.g., witness locations, travel costs, estimated trial duration, expert witness fees. 3. Assigning weights or scores to each factor based on their relative importance in the specific case. 4. Calculating a composite convenience score, or weighted average for both the current and alternative forums. 5. Comparing the scores to determine if the balance strongly favors dismissal. 6. Articulating the quantitative findings clearly and persuasively in legal arguments or judicial decisions, supported by specific references to Alabama rules of civil procedure and case law.